property that we purchase in any of the states that we invest in will be held by one LLC. The LLC might have a number of members that belong to at the holding level. Yes, Miss Kate, you have a question?
Could I say it?
Go ahead.
Yeah. So my colleague at Stanford Graduate School of Business LEAD program is located in Chicago and is interested in helping my company establish LLC there. So what I understand is that I'm the member, and is he going to be the manager?
It's your choice. I owned the LLC years ago, and I was both the owner and the manager. It's your choice. And we can speak about that separately because it's a bit different from this type of structure, but I'm happy to help you with that, at least to the level of my knowledge.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. All right. So why do we choose Wyoming? A lot of people talk to me about, oh, well, I have a company and my company is in Delaware, for instance, or other people will have a company in Nebraska. No, not Nebraska, Nevada, sorry, Nevada, because there is no state tax. Wyoming is very cheap, and Wyoming is very suited to smaller size companies, so with few investors. When you register in Delaware, first, it is more expensive. Delaware is better suited, for instance, for companies that want to do fundraising or that want to be listed. So in that case, Delaware will be a better place to do your company. For us, we are looking at smaller companies, usually 1 to 4 shareholders. We don't need to have the over-expanded Delaware rules, right? We're perfectly happy in Wyoming. Wyoming is very easy for us to do business, and it has strong privacy laws, which is great for us. That means that the IRS cannot snoop so much, right? Doing the business is cheap. It is easy to file our tax returns and annual returns. And there's no state income tax, either personally or corporate. So the only tax that you are liable to will be the federal tax, nothing at the level of the state. So to give you an example, California is currently the highest state tax, and it's around 14 to 15% extra on top of the federal taxes. And it actually goes up as well, depending on how much you earn. So this is not the case in Wyoming. Wyoming does not have a state tax. Does that make sense? Give me a thumbs up if that makes sense for you. So I want to show you what it looks like. Here are some of the really important best practice. I already talked about it, right? Always form an LLC in the state where you're buying the real estate. So for instance, we have quite a few properties currently in Florida. Mr. C, the federal tax currently is 21% for corporates. For personal, it will be a changing numbers. If you bear with me, I will show you and share a couple of other things. You could see what I mean. All right. So you always form a LLC in the state you're buying the real estate. That's the first thing. Another one, which is really important, always form a LLC per property. Right. So for each one of the houses that you are involved in, you will be involved in one LLC. This is not an extra cost to you, but it will allow you to protect the assets. So imagine that you are invested in 3 investments, all in Florida. All in Florida, right? You have 3 investments all in Florida. So you're going to have 3 LLCs all in Florida, because one of the reasons is we want to make sure that we protect your assets. And you may have heard that the US can be a very litigious country. And I'll give you an example. Imagine somebody is walking through your front lawn, since the front lawns are not usually enclosed, and falls in a hole and break their leg. They can sue you, saying that you are liable for the cost or even pain or other things like that. And if all your assets are under the same company, they could sue you for way more. So we want to make sure that we compartmentalize as much as possible to keep your assets safe, right? You also want to keep your flipping and your rental businesses completely separate, because the assets are not treated the same way in accounting. And this is why your flipping business will go under a C Corp at the holding level in Wyoming, and your renting business will go under a LLC also in Wyoming at the rental, right? So you will, if you're interested in doing both, you will have 2 different companies in your name under your name. Mr. Mel, what would you like me to explain more of? The corporation, all right, versus LLC. All right, great. Let me go to the next couple of slides, and then if you still have questions, we can look at it in a minute. Does that make sense? I think it will help. So one of the things that we do is, as I said before, we help people do unconventional leverage. And the reason why we don't go to normal conventional leverage, which we are all familiar with, which is go to the bank, get a mortgage, is that there are risks, especially as a foreign investor, for getting a mortgage in a foreign country. First, mortgages will be more expensive than the local, right? Secondly, in general with mortgages, imagine somebody has got a mortgage over 20 years for a property, and then something happens after about 18 years. This person paid the mortgage literally 1 day early every month for 18 years. And after 18 years, for sad reasons, is currently unable to pay any of the mortgage. When that happens, the bank is entitled to take the entire property, and the entire 18 years previous where the person paid the mortgage does not exist. So the bank gets, in French, what we would call the butter and the money for the butter, right? They get everything. Basically, they get twice. So we don't generally like to do that. When we do unconventional leverage, we help you co-invest with investors that have the same goals. So for instance, Mr. Mel, imagining that you are interested in investing in a flip and you want to invest in 100,000, we will help you invest with another person who wants to invest something else. Mr. Ming, actually it's everywhere. That's how mortgages work everywhere in the world. That's sad, but it's true. We will help you invest with somebody else and say the total investment is 150. You will own 2/3 and the other person will hold 1/3. Let me show you. Of course, profits and income will be proportionate to your investment. The neutral manager in our example is Noble Sky. So just give me a second. All right. So here's my example. Oh, this slide is a little bit wonky, so I apologize in advance. We have a Singaporean couple that wants to invest $20,000, and they want to invest both in flipping and in renting. We have a Malaysian family that wants to invest $50,000 only in renting. We have our Indonesian tycoon who wants to invest $150,000 just in flipping. And then we have all the other investors. Now I apologize, yeah, this slide is not great because the format did not transfer well. All right, so for our Singaporean family, when they're ready to invest, we're going to form two companies. Remember, a Singaporean couple, they're interested in both flipping and renting. We will form XYZ LLC in Wyoming, of course, for renting, and XYZ Inc. for flipping. For our investor, we will form, our Malaysian family, we will form QRT LLC, also in the state of Wyoming, where they will invest their 50. For our Indonesian tycoon, we will form ABC Inc., also in Wyoming. And then, of course, all our other investors have companies in Wyoming. So far, so good? Now, remember that all these numbers that you see in the top section, the size of the investments, will be loans made by the company, by the investors to their companies, right? So they will come in the form of loans. And of course, as I said before, all these are in Wyoming state. So everything's ready, and we found a great flip in Texas. And we say to our Singaporean couple, we have this great flip in Texas. Here's the research. I will show you an example later. Here's the research that we produced. Are you interested in being part of the investors? And our Singaporean couple say, yeah, put my $10,000 in. So they send in their $10,000. Now this property in Texas is a total investment of 150,000. So we go to our other investors and we'll say, we have this company, this property in Texas. Are you interested in participating? And all the investors say, yeah, or some of our investors say, yeah, and they bring up the remaining money. So this is what we do. We acquire the property and we create 123 LLC, which owns the property. The total property cost with all the flipping costs is 150. So our Singaporean couple put in 10,000. The balance of our investors put in $140,000. When the flip is completed, and the flip completes usually between 9 to 15 months on average. When the flip is completed, the property is sold to its final buyer. We will dissolve 123 LLC in Texas and return the funds and of course the profit to the shareholders. So our Singaporean couple will receive 6.67% of the sales price, which was, for instance, 250,000. And then the balance of our investors will receive 93.33%. Our Singaporean couple is so happy to have received back, say, 15,000. I'm making it up right now, okay? But say they got back 15,000, that they reinvest another time and then another time and another time. Does that make sense? Do you see where I'm going with that? Okay, thank you, Miss Felicia. Thank you, Mr. C. I just want to make sure that I haven't lost all of you yet. Thank you, Miss Ang. Thank you, Miss Doris, Mr. Danny. Thank you so much. All right, next. We actually find a great property in Jacksonville, Florida. It's a small house. Its total cost is $80,000 and it's for rental. So we say to our Singaporean couple, we have this great rental in Jacksonville, Florida. Are you interested in investing? We send out the research, of course. And our couple say, yep, we're interested. Here's our $10,000. Remember, the total cost of that property was $80,000. So our other investors say, yes, we are interested, and they decide to put the rest. We will form 777 LLC in the state of Florida that will own the rental. Mr. Mark, that's a great question. Let me get back to you about that in a minute. Hold it, all right? I will answer that. It's a great question. 77 LLC owns the rental property. Every month, 12.5% of the rental will go back to our Singaporean couple, will go into their LLC, XYZ LLC. And then the balance, 87.5%, will go into the other investor's pocket. Follow me so far? All right. Next. Our Malaysian family wants a rental property and they don't want to share with anyone. They want to be a solo investor. So we found them a solo investment in Jacksonville, Florida as well. We formed 888 LLC and spend the $50,000 for a solo rental. 100% of the rent goes back to QRT LLC every month. When it is time and the Malaysian family decides to sell the property, they will receive 100% of the money as well. Our Indonesian tycoon we found a house in New York State for $150,000 investment. So we formed 456 LLC in 456 LLC in the state of New York, and we buy the property for 150. It's a solo flip project, so the 150 will cover both buying the house, all the rehab, and all the ancillary costs, right? At the end of the project, we sell off the house, dissolve 456 LLC, and the entirety of the funds, 100%, goes back into ABC Inc. And our Indonesian tycoon, being a good business person, reinvests and then reinvests and then reinvests. So far, so good. Mr. Mark, let me answer your question about why we created a LLC in the state where the property is held. This is a flow through. All the taxation will happen only at the level of the holding company in Wyoming state. We do not want to create to have extra taxation to be paid at the level of Florida or at the level of Texas or any other state. So we are only creating the holding companies, right? The operating companies that own the final properties are always LLCs. And this is what every savvy property investors in the US does. And what it allows us to do is really limit the liability, but all the accounts will go back up to the Wyoming state level, and all the taxation goes back up to that level, which is a lot cheaper. Mr. Mark, does that answer your question? All right, thank you. Now, I know this little graph can be a little bit overwhelming. So if you have any question about this, now is a great time to ask them. Oh, I'm glad, Miss Ang, that it answered your question as well. And as I said before, the taxation, Mr. Mark, Noble Sky makes money when you make money. And so the way we earn money will be either as a share of the profit for flipping or as a percentage of the rental. Stay on until the end and I will show you in detail what it means. So I just want to make sure that I have answered all the previous questions. All right, so Mr. Mel, did he answer your question about Florida? In Florida, well, Florida is actually a great state as well because it doesn't do a lot of, it mostly does federal taxes, but in Florida, it would always be a LLC, so there would be no taxation at that level. All the taxation happens at the Wyoming level, or at the individual level if you are if you have a rental property. So I will add that thing. If you have a rental property and you have an LLC, the only taxation that you pay as the investor, the only taxation that you pay as an investor will be on the rental. And this will be applied on the yearly rental at the level of the person, right? So it will be using income, the income tax rate. Mr. Mark, you have a question. All right. Okay. Mr. Mark, do you have a question? All right, so I'm going to mute you if I may. All right. So this is part of the work that we do for you to make sure that you pay as little tax as possible. Mr. Mark, your question about losing money, that's never happened so far. And we have no intention for it to happen. Because as you said, we only make money when you make money. All right, any more question about this chart? All right, so let me move to the different investment strategies, and then we will go for, then we will go to have lunch. I've explained a little bit in terms of what certain things are. So your first investment strategy could be wholesaling, right? You also have the ones that we're the most fond of, fix and flip, and fix and rent. Of course, you purchase the property first in all the cases. There's also buy and hold. And I'll talk a lot more about it in a second. So just give me a sec with that. Owner finance. Short-term rentals, such as Airbnbs. And then the BRRRR approach, which is buy, rehab, rent, refinance, repeat. So let me explain a little bit more about each one of those strategies. And this is a very simple chart, really. Wholesale. Well, I talked about a wholesaler, right? So a wholesaler generally knows their local market. They acquire the properties at lower prices, and they will sell the property again on to the final person who's going to be taking taking care of everything. So it's not very complex. In fact, there is a story in Rich Dad Poor Dad where he shares about how he did his first wholesale deal. He was running through his neighborhood and he noticed that there was a house that had been there for a long time for sale and it wasn't selling, and it was getting into more and more disrepair. And he went and asked the landlord or the owner if the owner would allow him to sell it. And the owner said, well, nobody else has managed to. And he took it on, and he was able to flip the property to sell it quickly. And after he sold it quickly, he'd made $5,000. So it can be fairly low profitability. It's simple, but in general, wholesalers do it on their own dime. And that means that it can have a tax consequence. Mr. Mel, are you okay? I will keep your question for later. I don't think so, but I will keep your question for later. It's a really good question. The reason the tax consequences can be high is that it can shift the wholesaler from one tax bracket to the other. So just something to think about. For us, we rarely do a lot of wholesaling. Next, one of our favorites, fix and flip. So we buy a house that is not in very good state, we fix it, we flip it, right? So that means that we fix. The fixing can be anything from just repairing the floors and repainting the walls to fixing the roof, changing the electric, all sorts of things like that. That's really important. It's important to know how much it's going to cost in advance. That's our next section. I will speak to you about that after lunch. It can be extremely, extremely profitable if you do it right, which means a lot of management. Even if you're not the one doing the work, you need to be managing the crews. You need to make sure that everything is done the right way. Depending on how you do it, there can be tax consequences. So same thing, is it under a company or is it under your own name? Very, very different result at the end of the day. Fix and rent is also a strategy that we enjoy. Same thing, you can buy the property at you can buy the property at a lower price. Remember, we like to make money when we buy, not when we sell, which means that we are actually going to go and buy at the cheapest level possible, right? So it can be a little bit complex. It still needs a bit of fixing. We try to go for light rehab, light fix, and rent it out. Find the right tenant, manage the tenants. That may require some management. It can be quite profitable if you do it right and you purchase at the right price. You can generate a minimum of 10% net income. That's what we're going for renting. Tax consequences for renting are actually quite low because you only pay income tax on the rental. We'll talk about that again. Buy and hold, it's not very complicated, but it may or may not be profitable. If you are holding an empty property, do you still need to manage it? Do you think you still need to manage? Yes, you do. And in some areas, such as Florida, for instance, the properties really need to be looked after because otherwise humidity plays a game on it, right? And you get mold and you get all sorts of other problems. But your tax consequences may be low. It's not really a making money process for buy and hold. Owner finance is something that you can tag onto fix and flip, for instance. And what it means is that you are helping the buyer by giving them the financing. So that means the buyer is not going to go to the bank, but you are going to offer the financing. Usually, of course, that means that the new owner, the buyer, is going to pay a higher interest rate. It's also often because for some reason the buyer cannot get bank loans. So it requires a fair amount of management and you need to be very careful who you choose to purchase the property in that case. I've also heard of a number of cases where the new owner failed, stopped paying, in which case, as the owner that's offering the finance, you're entitled to repossess the property and find another buyer. Tax consequences are not as high because even though there might be a profit on the property, you are paid monthly. So something to think about. Short-term rental can be complex. It's requires a lot of management, right? Because every time somebody checks out, you need to go and check in the property, make sure everything is up to scratch, make sure everything is clean. Of course, you also will need to clean the property in between. So it requires quite a lot of management. But it can be extremely profitable, depending, of course, on how much you paid for the property. But short-term rental is a really good strategy. And for short-term rental, Airbnbs, for example, but there are other ways to do short-term rental, we actually aim for a return of a minimum of 15% per annum. It can be very profitable. Last but not least, the BRRRR method. So first, buy, simple. Second, rehab, fixing. Third, rent, find a regular tenant. Once this property has been rented for at least 6 months, right, you can actually go to the bank and refinance the property, because the bank can see how much rental you are getting. They are okay to refinance it. That means you pull out some of the capital and you can do it again. Repeat, do it again and again and again. And in fact, this is how most property fortunes are made. Over the past 2 centuries, 90% of millionaires became so through investing in real estate. Sounds like a reasonable thing to look at, right? The only caveat with BRRRR is you need to be the only investor. You cannot refinance on a property that has several owners. So if you are co-investing with someone, you will not really be able to refinance. Does that make sense to you? I hope I explained these as clearly as possible. All right, now let me see. Before I send you out to lunch, Mr. Mel, I will keep your property price question for a little bit later. All right, so table it, and if I don't get to it, please ask it again. All right, any other question right now about the different investment approach in properties? So I will add that in the case of Noble Sky, we really practice fix and flip, fix and rent, and short-term rental. Mr. Mark, in the case of doing BRRRR, even if you're a foreigner, you can refinance the property. They will look at who you are. But yes, it will go to the C Corp normally, or the LLC. It's going to be the LLC actually, because if it's rented out, it's going to be in an LLC. So they look at you as a person as well, which is why we can really only do it for one shareholder if there's one owner of the property. And banks, you know, they mean business. So if you're gonna, if your property is a good risk, they know when they refinance it that if it's not paid, they can seize the property. It's very simple. It's all about business. And I will add one more thing, because you probably, if you research, you would find that, and I think it's quite important to remember. The refinance portion, generally, the bank will value the property at today's price. So if you bought your property at a cheap price and the property prices have gone up in between, it's a really good way for you to pull out some capital so you can reinvest. In fact, there is one of the people that we listen to that calls it refi till you die. And he advocates, especially if you're a US tax resident, but to basically refinance your properties over and over and over again. Because every time you refinance, it is based on the current value of the property rather than what you purchase it for. So do we have any question before I send you on the lunch break? All right, so if we have no question, I'm going to give you an hour for the lunch break, and I will see you back here at 1:30. If you are currently watching this on your mobile phone, you want to make sure that you are come on a computer if you want to follow along with the research, because the spreadsheets will make it very difficult to follow along. So that's the first thing. Second, for any of you, if you want to look at the research, please make sure that you send us your Gmail address. I think most people have so far, but in case, reach out directly to either Doris or Hazik and give us your Gmail address so that you can have access, you can be given access to the folders. It's on the Google Drive. All right. So I'm looking forward to seeing you back here in 1 hour at 1:30, actually, slightly less than an hour now, and enjoy your meal.